Have you ever been publicly humiliated by your own parents at your birthday dinner, only to have a complete stranger defend you more than your own family ever did? That's exactly what happened to me on my 29th birthday at the most exclusive steakhouse in Manhattan. While my parents were busy telling me how disappointed they were in my life choices, they had no idea that the man at the corner table had been watching everything, and what he did next changed my life forever. Hello, I'm Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old. Today I want to share the story of the most dramatic night of my life, when my parents kicked me out of my own birthday dinner, not knowing that the CEO of the company I'd been secretly interviewing with was sitting 3 tables away, witnessing every humiliating moment. What my family didn't know was that their cruelty was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. If you're watching this, please subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Growing up as a Mitchell meant living under a microscope of impossible expectations. My father, Jonathan Mitchell, was a federal judge with a reputation that opened every door in Washington, D.C. His courtroom decisions made national headlines, and his influence extended from the Supreme Court to the most exclusive political circles in the country. My mother, Catherine, served as the Deputy Secretary of Education, a position that came with constant media scrutiny and social obligations. She hosted dinner parties for cabinet members, spoke at international education conferences, and was frequently quoted in the Washington Post's political coverage. My older brother Marcus had followed the perfect path that made our parents beam with pride. Harvard Law Review, Supreme Court clerkship under Chief Justice Williams, now partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, making $2 million a year. At 32, he was everything my parents had dreamed of in a child. His engagement to Victoria Lancaster, daughter of the Attorney General, had been featured on the society pages of 3 major newspapers. And then there was me, the art major, the disappointment, the black sheep who chose passion over prestige and had been paying for it every day since. After graduating from Parsons School of Design with a degree in digital media arts, I'd spent 5 years building my career as a freelance graphic designer. I loved what I did, creating brand identities for startups, designing websites that told compelling stories, crafting visual experiences that moved people and drove business results. But to my parents, I was just another starving artist embarrassing the family name. The criticism started small, but grew more cutting each year. Last Christmas dinner became a battleground of comparisons. Sarah's still doing her little art projects, my mother told the Secretary of Treasury's wife, her voice dripping with condescension. We keep hoping she'll grow out of it and find real work like her brother. My father wouldn't even mention my career to his judicial colleagues. When asked about his children at the Federal Bar Association dinners, he'd beam about Marcus's latest Supreme Court victory and conveniently forget I existed. We have 1 child-in-law, he'd say, gesturing to Marcus while I stood right beside him, following in the family tradition of public service. The exclusion wasn't just emotional. It was systematic and calculated. State dinners, judicial conferences, political fundraisers, events I'd grown up attending as the judge's daughter were now off limits. It wouldn't be appropriate, dear, my mother would explain when I asked why my invitation hadn't arrived. Our circle expects a certain caliber of professional achievement. You understand. I didn't understand. I understood that they were ashamed of me. The family Christmas card became another weapon. This year's version featured 3 people, my parents and Marcus, posed in my father's judicial chambers. When I asked about it, my mother's response was ice cold. We wanted to showcase the family's professional achievements. Perhaps next year, if you've done something noteworthy. My brother's engagement party last spring was the final straw that broke something inside me. 500 guests, including half the Supreme Court, and 3 cabinet members, covered by the Washington Post's society pages. I learned about it from Instagram when Victoria Lancaster posted photos of the evening, tagging everyone except the groom's sister. When I confronted my parents about being excluded from my own brother's engagement celebration, their response revealed the depth of their shame. Until you do something with your life that we can be proud of, my mother said, not looking up from her morning briefing papers, you can't expect to be included in serious family events. But while my family saw failure, others saw potential. David Chen, the tech entrepreneur whose medical device startup I'd been designing for, recognized something my parents couldn't. "Your work isn't just beautiful design," he told me after reviewing my brand identity system for his company. "It's strategic thinking made visual. You understand market psychology in ways that MBAs with 15 years of experience still struggle with." That comment planted a seed that would eventually grow into everything. David's startup, Chen Medical Innovations, had been struggling to secure major investors despite having revolutionary technology. Their previous branding looked like a science fair project, and their investor presentations were putting venture capitalists to sleep. I'd spent 3 months completely reimagining their visual identity, creating presentations that told the story of how their devices would save lives and transform healthcare. The results spoke louder than my parents ever had. Chen Medical secured $50 million in Series B funding 2 weeks after implementing my rebrand. The lead investor told David that the presentation materials were the most compelling they'd seen in 20 years of healthcare investing. What my family didn't know was that David had introduced me to someone who would change my trajectory forever. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Global, a Fortune 500 consulting firm that worked with governments and corporations worldwide. Reynolds Global was the kind of company my parents respected. The firm that advised presidents, consulted for Fortune 100 companies, and employed exactly the type of people my family spent their careers trying to impress. Marcus had seen my work, my strategic thinking, my ability to translate complex ideas into visual narratives that moved markets and influenced decisions. For 3 months, I'd been secretly interviewing for a position that would shock my family into silence. Senior Creative Director, leading a team of 50 across 12 countries. Base salary, $425,000. Equity package worth potentially millions. The kind of role that required security clearance and came with access to government contracts. The interviews had been intense and thorough. 5 rounds over 12 weeks, each more challenging than the last. I'd presented to the board, designed mock campaigns for Fortune 100 clients, and undergone psychological evaluations typically reserved for CIA operatives. Marcus Reynolds didn't just hire employees, he recruited strategic weapons. The final interview was scheduled for the Monday after my birthday weekend. But Reynolds Global's CEO had a reputation for unconventional hiring practices. He believed in observing candidates in real-world situations, under pressure, when they thought no one was watching. He wanted to see how they handled adversity, family dynamics, and personal crisis. That's why Marcus Reynolds was dining alone at Maria that Friday night, the same restaurant my parents had chosen for my birthday dinner. He wasn't there by coincidence. He was conducting the final phase of my evaluation. My parents had chosen Maria because it was where they took visiting Supreme Court justices and cabinet members. The restaurant's clientele read like a who's who of American power. Senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, international diplomats, and the kind of old money families who shaped policy from their private clubs. "At least the food will be worthy of the occasion," my mother had said when confirming the reservation, even if the guest of honor isn't living up to family standards. The insults had started before I'd even arrived. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready, choosing a black Armani dress that whispered elegance rather than shouting for attention. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one my mother claimed I hadn't earned the right to wear yet, completed the look. I'd wanted to look successful, professional, worthy of the Mitchell name. Instead, I looked like someone trying too hard to belong in a world that had already rejected her. I arrived at Maria to find my parents already seated at our reserved table, positioned perfectly to see and be seen by Manhattan's elite. My father was deep in conversation with Senator Williams at the adjacent table, while my mother surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. "Sarah," my mother said as I approached, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear, "How lovely that you could join us. I wasn't sure you'd make it, given your irregular schedule." The first blow landed before I'd even sat down. My father barely looked up from his conversation. "Order whatever you'd like," he said dismissively. "We're paying after all." The implication hung in the air like poisonous gas. At 29, I was still financially dependent on parents who never let me forget it. What they didn't know was that my freelance business had generated $340,000 in revenue the previous year. What they didn't know was that Chen Medical had offered me a full-time position as their creative director at $180,000 annually, which I'd turned down to pursue something bigger. What they didn't know was that 3 Fortune 500 companies were bidding for my exclusive services. But I'd never told them any of this. Their disapproval had become so constant that I'd stopped trying to defend myself. It was easier to let them think I was failing than to endure their inevitable dismissal of my success. The dinner started poorly and spiraled into disaster with each course. My father ordered the most expensive wine on Maria's extensive list, a $800 bottle of Burgundy that he proceeded to critique loudly to the sommelier. "The vintage is acceptable," he announced, "though I've had better from this vineyard. We'll make do." The performance was for the benefit of Senator Williams, who nodded approvingly at my father's supposed sophistication. Image was everything in my parents' world, and they curated every interaction like a museum exhibit. My mother spent the appetizer course networking with the table of State Department officials behind us. "Catherine Mitchell," she introduced herself, "Deputy Secretary of Education. Perhaps you saw my interview on CNN about the International Education Initiative?" She name-dropped 3 cabinet members and 2 Supreme Court justices before our entrees arrived, establishing her importance to anyone within earshot. Then they turned their attention to me. 29 years old, Sarah," my father began, his voice carrying across our section of the restaurant. "At your age, Marcus was already arguing cases before federal appellate courts. He'd clerked for Chief Justice Williams, published 3 law review articles, and was being recruited by every major firm in the country. Some people develop at different paces," I said quietly, cutting my halibut with deliberate precision. "Develop?" My mother's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, weeds don't develop into flowers. They just spread and become more of a problem." Marcus Reynolds, dining alone at table 12 near the window, was watching everything while pretending to read the Wall Street Journal on his phone. The attack intensified with each course. By the time our main dishes arrived, other diners were openly staring at our table. My parents' voices had grown louder with each glass of wine, their criticism more public and more cruel. "We've been patient," my father continued, his judicial training evident in his methodical destruction of my character. "But patience has limits. You can't live in a fantasy forever, calling yourself an artist when you're really just unemployed with expensive hobbies." "I have clients," I said. "I run a business." "Playing with computer graphics isn't a business," my mother snapped, her voice carrying to the State Department table. "It's what college students do for beer money. You're nearly 30 years old, Sarah. When are you going to join the real world?" Senator Williams had turned to watch our table. The entertainment value of a federal judge publicly dressing down his daughter was apparently irresistible. "The Hendersons' daughter just made partner at McKinsey," my mother announced, as if reading from a prepared list of my failures. "The Morrisons' son was just appointed to the Federal Trade Commission. The Lancasters' daughter, Marcus's fiancée, just argued her first case before the Supreme Court. And what do we have to show for 29 years of investment in you?" She gestured dismissively at me. "A portfolio of doodles that no one takes seriously." The cruelty was surgical in its precision. Every word had been chosen to cause maximum damage while maintaining the appearance of parental concern. "We've tried everything," my father added, his voice growing louder as the wine took effect. "Private schools, college tuition, connections, introductions, opportunities handed to you on a silver platter. All wasted on someone who thinks playing with pictures on a computer constitutes a career." The assault continued through the dessert course. By now, half the restaurant was either watching our table directly or straining to hear every word. The gossip would spread through Washington's political circles within hours. Judge Mitchell's disappointing daughter, publicly humiliated at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The Preston's son started his own law firm last year. My mother continued her litany of other people's successful children. Already has 30 employees and just won a $50 million settlement. That's what success looks like, Sarah. That's what we expected when we invested in your education. Each comparison was a knife twist designed to remind me how completely I'd failed their expectations. That's when my father delivered the killing blow. "We've made a decision, Sarah," he announced, reaching into his jacket for an envelope. "Either you get a real job, law school, business school, something respectable that befits the Mitchell name, or we're done pretending you're living up to our standards." "What does that mean?" I asked, though the dread in my stomach already knew. "It means," my mother said, her voice carrying across the restaurant like a courtroom pronouncement, That we can't keep financing your delusions or claiming you as our daughter when it reflects poorly on our family's reputation. She pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table with the same clinical precision my father used when sentencing criminals. The weight of it felt disproportionate to its size, like it contained something much heavier than paper. Inside was a letter, typed on my father's official judicial letterhead, the same letterhead he used for federal court decisions that shaped American law. The document was formal, legal, and devastating in its finality. "To whom it may concern," it began. "We, Jonathan and Catherine Mitchell, hereby formally disown our daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, effective immediately. She is no longer recognized as a member of this family, entitled to no financial support, inheritance claims, or professional associations with the Mitchell family name. This decision is final and irrevocable. Signed, the Honorable Jonathan Mitchell, United States District Judge, Catherine L. Mitchell, Deputy Secretary of Education." The date was today, my 29th birthday. "Consider it a birthday gift," my father said, his voice carrying to every corner of our section. "The gift of reality. The gift of finally understanding that we're done subsidizing your failure." I read the letter twice, my hands remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Around us, Maria hummed with the conversations of Manhattan's elite, oblivious to the family destruction happening at table 7. "Stand up," my mother commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Take your things and leave. This dinner is for family members only, and according to that document, you no longer qualify." The entire restaurant was watching now. The whispers had started at nearby tables and spread outward like ripples in a pond. "That's Judge Mitchell's daughter. They're actually kicking her out. How absolutely humiliating. The poor girl looks devastated. But I wasn't devastated. I was liberated." I stood slowly, gathering my purse and the letter that had just severed 29 years of family ties. The document felt like freedom made manifest, proof that I owed these people nothing, that their approval was no longer required for my happiness. But as I turned to leave, dignified in my defeat, a voice from across the restaurant stopped me cold. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. It cut through the ambient noise of silverware and conversation like a blade. "Ms. Mitchell, could you join me for a moment?" I turned to see a distinguished man in his 50s standing beside table 12 near the window. He was impeccably dressed in what I recognized as a bespoke Tom Ford suit, carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people, and was looking directly at me with what appeared to be admiration, not pity. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" I asked, aware that every eye in the restaurant was on us, that this public intervention was about to become the evening's main entertainment. "Marcus Reynolds, Reynolds Global Consulting," he said, extending his hand with a slight bow of respect. "I believe we have an appointment Monday morning for your final interview, but after witnessing the display at your table, I think we should have that conversation now." My parents' faces went from flushed with wine to white with shock. Reynolds Global was a name they knew well, the firm that advised presidents, consulted for Fortune 100 companies, and employed exactly the kind of people my parents spent their careers trying to impress. Marcus Reynolds was a legend in Washington circles, someone whose client list read like a directory of world leaders. "Mr. Reynolds." My father stood quickly, his judicial training kicking in as he recognized the magnitude of the situation. "Jonathan Mitchell, federal judge for the Southern District of New York. I believe we met at the Judiciary Conference last year." "I know exactly who you are," Marcus interrupted, his tone ice-cold and carrying across the restaurant. "I also know exactly who your daughter is, which is why I'm confused by what I just witnessed." He turned to me, his expression warming dramatically. "Sarah, would you mind joining me? I think your former parents might benefit from learning what they apparently don't know about their daughter." The emphasis on former wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. The walk from table 7 to table 12 felt like crossing a minefield. Every diner in Maria was watching, including a society blogger who had already started typing on her phone. Tomorrow's gossip columns would lead with this story. Marcus pulled out my chair personally, a gesture of respect that contrasted sharply with my parents' treatment. "Please sit. You've had a difficult evening, but I suspect it's about to improve significantly." My parents remained standing at their table, uncertain whether to stay or go, caught between their humiliation and their desperate desire to know what was happening. Marcus addressed them directly. "Judge Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell, you might want to rejoin us for this conversation. It concerns your daughter's future, and frankly, after what I've observed tonight, I think you'll find it enlightening." They returned reluctantly, my mother's face flushed with humiliation, my father's with barely controlled anger at having his authority challenged in public. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus began, addressing me with the formal respect my parents had never shown. "I apologize for the unconventional circumstances, but given what I've observed tonight, I think it's time to make our Monday conversation official." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick document bound in Reynolds Global's distinctive navy leather portfolio. The company logo was embossed in gold, a symbol recognized in boardrooms from Washington to Tokyo. "This is your offer letter," he announced, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "Senior Creative Director, Reynolds Global Consulting. Base compensation $425,000 annually. Performance bonuses that typically add another $100,000, equity participation that, when vested, could be worth several $1,000,000, and oversight of creative strategy for our 12 international offices." My mother's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the restaurant like gunfire. "The position," Marcus continued, clearly enjoying the moment, "came available because our previous director left to start his own agency after making enough money here to fund his retirement at 35. Frankly, we've been looking for someone with your specific combination of artistic vision and strategic business acumen for 18 months. He opened the document to a specific page, pointing to metrics and projections that made my parents' government salaries look like minimum wage. "Your work on the Chen Medical rebrand didn't just look beautiful," Marcus explained. "It increased their market valuation by 65%. The visual identity system you created helped them secure $50 million in Series B funding and position them for an IPO that could be worth billions." My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "More importantly," Marcus continued, "your strategic presentation convinced the Department of Defense to award Chen Medical a $200 million contract for next-generation medical devices. Your design work didn't just look pretty. It influenced national security decisions." He looked directly at my parents, his expression shifting from warm to coldly professional. "What impressed me most wasn't just the quality of Sarah's creative work, but her business acumen. In 5 years, she's built a client roster that includes 7 Fortune 500 companies, 3 government agencies, and 4 tech startups that have collectively raised over $300 million in funding. That's not art as a hobby. That's art as strategic business advantage." Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to a series of images. "Would you like to see some of her work? This is the rebranding she did for Morrison Electronics. Her visual identity system helped them secure a $4 billion manufacturing contract with the Pentagon. This campaign for Henderson Corp increased their government contracts by 40%. And this presentation design she created for the State Department's International Education Initiative, well, let's just say it influenced foreign policy decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars." My mother was staring at the images in stunned silence. My father looked like he'd been physically struck. "Your daughter," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every table in our section, "has built something remarkable, which makes tonight's performance all the more baffling. You've just publicly disowned one of the most talented strategic communications experts in the country." Senator Williams had abandoned all pretense of not listening. The State Department officials had turned their chairs to face our table. This was better theater than anything on Broadway. My mother tried desperately to salvage the situation. "We had no idea Sarah's work had achieved such recognition in government circles. Because you never asked," I said quietly, my voice steady for the first time all evening. "Because you decided it wasn't worth knowing about." Marcus nodded approvingly. "In my business, I evaluate talent for a living. I can tell you that your daughter possesses a combination of creative intelligence and strategic business instinct that's extraordinarily rare. That's why we're offering her a position that typically requires 15 years of experience and an MBA from Wharton." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Sarah, I was planning to extend this offer Monday morning after our final interview, but given tonight's circumstances, And after observing how you've handled yourself under extreme family pressure, I think we can expedite the process. The offer is on the table right now. Your choice. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving to watch this unprecedented drama unfold. I looked at my parents' faces. Shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that they'd just publicly humiliated someone who was far more successful than they'd ever imagined. I looked at the disownment letter they'd given me, demanding I change my name and disappear from their lives. Then I looked at Marcus Reynolds, who had seen my worth when my own family couldn't. I accept, I said, my voice carrying across the silent restaurant. When do I start? Tuesday morning. We'll handle the logistics Monday, but consider yourself officially hired. Welcome to Reynolds Global. Marcus stood and extended his hand, sealing the deal with a handshake that was photographed by at least 3 people in the restaurant. He then addressed my former parents one final time, his voice carrying the authority of someone who advised world leaders. Judge Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell, you've just disowned one of the most talented strategic thinkers I've encountered in 25 years of business. Your daughter's work has influenced billion-dollar decisions and shaped government policy. I'd suggest reconsidering your position. But honestly, that's between you and your conscience. As we prepared to leave, my mother grabbed my arm desperately. Sarah, wait. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said gently, removing her hand from my arm. You made your position crystal clear. I'm no longer your daughter. That was your choice, documented on federal judicial letterhead, and I respect your decision. But we didn't know about your success, your real career. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to find out. I pulled out the disownment letter, holding it up for the restaurant to see. This is what you wanted. Consider it granted. My father tried one last desperate appeal. Sarah, you're our daughter. Family forgives. Family supports each other, I interrupted. Family celebrates each other's successes. Family doesn't disown children on their birthdays. According to your own document, I'm not family anymore. Marcus offered me his arm with old-world courtesy. Shall we? I'd like to discuss your transition timeline over coffee somewhere more private. The last thing I heard as we left Maria was my father saying to Senator Williams, "There's been a terrible mistake. We didn't understand the situation." But there hadn't been a mistake. There had been a revelation. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Society blogger's post went viral within 2 hours. Federal judge publicly disowns daughter at Manhattan restaurant. Fortune 500 CEO intervenes in stunning reversal. By midnight, it was trending on 3 social media platforms with over 1 million views. The story reached the Washington Post by Sunday morning, complete with photos taken by restaurant patrons. The headline read, "Mitchell Family Drama, When Personal Becomes Political." My mother's position at the Department of Education required her to issue a statement about private family matters that don't reflect on professional responsibilities. The irony was delicious. By Monday, every major news outlet had picked up the story. CNN ran a segment called "The Cost of Family Expectations." Fox News framed it as "Government Officials' Family Values Under Scrutiny." The New York Times published an op-ed about success, family approval, and the price of parental disappointment. My father's judicial colleagues began questioning his judgment both privately and publicly. If he couldn't recognize extraordinary talent in his own daughter, how could he be trusted to evaluate complex legal matters? The Federal Judicial Conference received enough complaints to warrant an informal review of his recent decisions. Marcus called Saturday morning. The board met in emergency session last night. Given the media attention and the way you handled yourself under impossible pressure, they've unanimously approved an additional signing bonus. $100,000 to help with your transition and to demonstrate our confidence in your abilities. The money wasn't the point. The recognition was everything. Monday's meeting was a formality wrapped in ceremony. Marcus personally introduced me to the board of directors, 12 of the most influential business leaders in America. My first presentation was to outline a comprehensive rebranding strategy for a Fortune 50 company whose current visual identity was losing them market share. Tuesday morning, I walked into Reynolds Global's Manhattan headquarters as Senior Creative Director, leading a team of 50 creative professionals who would reshape how America's biggest companies communicated with the world. My corner office on the 42nd floor overlooked Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city feel like a kingdom I was destined to rule. The nameplate on my desk read, Sarah Mitchell, Senior Creative Director. Not the judge's disappointment, not the government official's embarrassment, just Sarah Mitchell, successful in her own right. My first major project was rebranding the Federal Trade Commission's public awareness campaigns. The same agency my parents had bragged about their friends' children joining as junior associates. Now, I was redesigning their entire visual communication strategy from the executive level. The irony was perfect. The daughter they disowned for being just an artist was now creating the visual identity that would shape how the American government communicated with its citizens. My brother Marcus called Wednesday afternoon. Sarah, what the hell happened Friday night? Mom and Dad won't talk about it, but the entire city is buzzing about some restaurant incident involving you and a CEO. I got the career you all thought I wasn't capable of, I said simply, and learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. They're devastated, he said. They think they made a mistake. They didn't make a mistake, I replied. They made a choice. They chose to disown their daughter rather than admit they were wrong about her potential. Now they have to live with that choice. But surely you can forgive... Marcus, I interrupted. Where were you Friday night when they were humiliating me in front of half of Manhattan's elite? Where were you when they handed me legal papers disowning me on my birthday? Where was the family loyalty then? He had no answer, because there was no answer. The family that demanded loyalty had shown none when I needed it most. Within 6 weeks, my work at Reynolds Global had caught international attention. The European Union hired us to redesign their digital communication strategy after seeing my Pentagon presentations. The project was worth $12 million, and I was the lead creative director. Forbes called for an interview. From family outcast to Fortune 500, the Sarah Mitchell story. The article ran with the headline, When Family Can't See Success, Sometimes Strangers Can. They used a photo from my office, me standing confidently in front of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, wearing the same dress I'd worn the night I was disowned. The reconciliation attempts began immediately and intensified with each new success story that appeared in the media. Flowers arrived at my office weekly. Not the yellow roses I was allergic to that my mother had been sending for years, but white orchids, my actual favorite flowers that she'd never bothered to learn about until now. The cards became increasingly desperate. Darling, we're so proud of your success. Love, Mom and Dad. I had my assistant return them with a note. No longer at this address. My father tried emailing my work account with the subject line, Urgent, Family Matter. My IT department had already blocked all Mitchell family domains per my security request. The auto-reply was professional and devastating. This sender is not authorized to contact Director Mitchell. My mother attempted to leverage her government position, calling Reynolds Global's main number and demanding to speak to me about a matter of national importance. Marcus Reynolds personally took the call and informed her that harassment of his employees by government officials could constitute a federal crime. Victoria Lancaster, my brother's fiancée and the daughter of the Attorney General, sent a LinkedIn message. Sarah, your parents are heartbroken. Family should forgive family. Perhaps we could talk. I responded publicly, knowing she'd screenshot it for my family. I agree that family should forgive family. That's why I'm disappointed that my family chose legal disownment over forgiveness when I needed their support. But their choice has been made and documented. Tuesday brought the most desperate attempt yet. They showed up at Reynolds Global's lobby, demanding to see me as if their parental authority could override corporate security. I watched on the security monitors as they tried to assert their importance to the uniformed guards. We're her parents, my mother insisted, as if that title still carried weight. I'm Deputy Secretary of Education. He's a federal judge. We demand to see our daughter. I'm sorry, the guard replied, checking his screen. You're not on Director Mitchell's approved visitor list. This is ridiculous, my father's voice echoed in the marble lobby. We're her family. Security Chief Rodriguez approached them with the patience of someone dealing with unstable individuals. Sir, ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave the premises. Director Mitchell's instructions regarding unwanted contact were very specific. They tried twice more that week, each time more desperate than the last. The third time, Rodriguez mentioned trespassing charges and federal building security protocols. The threat of arrest finally convinced them to stop. My mother resorted to mutual acquaintances next. Mrs. Henderson from the Judicial Wives Circle called my office. "Your mother is absolutely devastated, Sarah. She realizes she made a terrible mistake. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive." "Mrs. Henderson," I replied, "I appreciate your concern, but my parents didn't make a mistake. They made a calculated decision to disown their daughter in public, on her birthday, using legal documents. That suggests careful consideration, not a momentary error in judgment." Even Marcus Reynolds received calls. "Your father offered a significant donation to our political action committee in exchange for arranging a meeting with you," he told me, clearly amused by the attempt at bribery. "I hope you told him that Reynolds Global doesn't accept bribes," I replied. "I told him that we don't compromise our employees' clearly stated boundaries, regardless of the inducement. The boundaries I'd established were crystal clear and non-negotiable. No contact, no exceptions, no reconciliation without genuine accountability. And maybe not even then. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, my life had transformed beyond recognition. The promotion to executive creative director came with a seat at the company's executive committee, reporting directly to Marcus Reynolds himself and helping shape strategy for Fortune 100 clients. My compensation had increased to $625,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that had averaged another $200,000. The equity package was vesting ahead of schedule due to the company's explosive growth, partly driven by the government contracts my work had secured. I'd moved into a penthouse apartment in Tribeca, 3,200 square feet, with panoramic views of Manhattan and the Hudson River. The monthly rent was more than my parents' government salaries combined, paid for entirely by my own success. Michael Chen, David's older brother and a cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai, had become a constant presence in my life. We'd been introduced at a medical device innovation conference where I was presenting our rebranding strategy for 3 healthcare companies. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours, covering everything from family disappointment to building success despite sabotage. "They really disowned you for being an artist?" he'd asked over dinner at Daniel, another restaurant my parents frequented but could no longer afford on government salaries. "Best thing that ever happened to me," I'd replied, meaning every word. Michael understood family rejection intimately. His parents had cut him off for choosing medicine over taking over the family's import business. "We're professional orphans," he joked on our 3rd date. "People who succeeded because our families failed us, not despite it." The relationship deepened quickly, built on shared understanding of what it meant to be rejected by the people who should have been our biggest supporters. When he proposed 6 months later during a weekend in the Hamptons, at a house I'd bought with my signing bonus, the ring came with a story. "I want to build a family that actually supports each other," he said, as we watched the sunset from our private beach. The kind of family we never had but always deserved. I'd established the Mitchell Creative Excellence Scholarship, using my family name deliberately and prominently. The scholarship funded 5 students annually from working-class backgrounds to attend design school, with preference given to those whose families didn't support their artistic ambitions. The first recipient was Maria Santos, a young woman from Queens whose parents cleaned offices in Manhattan. She reminded me of myself, before I learned to apologize for existing, before I accepted that I'd never be enough for people who'd already decided I wasn't worthy. The annual scholarship dinner was held at the Museum of Modern Art, with Reynolds Global as the presenting sponsor. The guest list included everyone who mattered in New York's creative and business communities. The event raised $2 million its first year and established me as a major philanthropic force in arts education. The family updates came through New York's powerful gossip network and were universally devastating. My parents' marriage was disintegrating under the weight of public humiliation and private blame. The fight over who was responsible for losing Sarah had become a war of mutual destruction. My mother blamed my father's authoritarian parenting style. My father blamed my mother's social climbing and status obsession. Their separation was announced in the New York Times Weddings and Celebrations section. Ironically, right next to the announcement of my engagement to Michael. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on anyone in their social circle. My father had been forced into early retirement after the Judicial Ethics Committee's investigation into his judgment and character. The official reason was family circumstances affecting professional responsibilities. The real reason was that his colleagues no longer trusted someone who could publicly humiliate his own successful daughter. He'd moved to a modest apartment on the Upper West Side, his federal pension barely covering Manhattan's cost of living. The Lincoln Park mansion where I'd grown up was sold to cover legal fees and settlement costs from the divorce. My mother had resigned from the Department of Education after an internal investigation into her family values and public conduct. She'd moved to a studio apartment in Brooklyn Heights, teaching ESL classes to immigrants for $35,000 a year. The woman who'd once hosted cabinet members for dinner was now helping refugees learn English. The irony was poetic. Victoria Lancaster, my former sister-in-law-to-be, had broken off her engagement to Marcus after determining that association with the Mitchell family name was politically toxic. My brother was left alone, his perfect life derailed by his family's cruelty toward the sister he'd never defended. He'd called me once, 6 months after the dinner, when his engagement ended. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you." "Yes," I'd replied. "You should have, but you didn't. And now you're experiencing what it feels like when people abandon you for reasons beyond your control. Can we talk? I want to make things right." "Marcus," I said, using his formal name deliberately. "You watched our parents disown me on my birthday and said nothing. You've had 29 years to stand up for your sister and chose silence every time. What exactly would we talk about now?" He had no answer. My phone showed 312 unread messages from various family members, all archived automatically to a folder I'd never opened. The best indicator of my emotional growth wasn't anger or vindication. It was complete indifference to their drama. My assistant had standing instructions. The Mitchell family are not authorized contacts. All communication attempts should be documented but not forwarded. February 28, 2025. 1 year since the disownment dinner that changed everything. I sat in my corner office reviewing the announcement that would appear in tomorrow's Wall Street Journal. My promotion to Chief Creative Officer of Reynolds Global, the youngest person to hold that position in the company's 50-year history. My engagement to Michael had been featured in New York Magazine's Power Couple issue. Our wedding was planned for June at the Museum of Natural History, a venue my parents could never have afforded and would never be invited to. The 40% salary increase pushed my compensation to $875,000 annually, plus equity that made me a millionaire on paper. The executive track was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. CFO within 3 years, CEO within 10. Marcus Reynolds had made it clear that I was being groomed to eventually take over the company. My work had transcended personal success and entered the realm of cultural impact. The government rebranding projects I'd led had improved public trust in federal agencies by measurable percentages. The Fortune 100 campaigns had generated billions in additional revenue for clients. My creative strategies were being taught as case studies at Harvard Business School. The industry awards had started arriving monthly. American Advertising Federation's Gold Medal, Design Museum's Lifetime Achievement Award, Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 for social impact. Each recognition was covered by media outlets my parents read religiously. My mother had attempted one final approach through Dr. Elizabeth Warren, yes, the senator, who had known our family for years. "Catherine Mitchell is absolutely devastated," the senator's office called to say. "She wants to make amends for what she now realizes was a terrible mistake." "Senator Warren," I replied, "I have tremendous respect for your work. But my former mother didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. She chose to legally disown her daughter, rather than admit she was wrong about that daughter's potential. I respect her choice, and ask that she respect mine to move forward without her." The senator never called back. The American Creativity Awards Gala was next week. Think of it as the Oscars for the advertising and design industry. I was receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award, presented by Marcus Reynolds himself. My former family would read about it in the New York Times business section, along with everyone else. The therapy I'd started after the disownment had helped me understand that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that healing didn't need their participation. Dr. Martinez had guided me through the complex emotions of family rejection and helped me build the emotional infrastructure for genuine success. "You've built something remarkable," she noted during our final session. "Not in spite of your family, but because you finally chose yourself over their approval." She was right. I'd spent 29 years trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The moment I stopped trying to prove myself to them, I started proving myself to the world. The disownment letter hung framed in my office between my Forbes cover story and my MBA diploma from Columbia, which I'd earned part-time while building my career, graduating summa cum laude. Visitors always asked about the letter. "It's my freedom certificate," I'd explain. "The day my family gave me permission to succeed without their approval." Some people were shocked by the display. Others understood immediately. Those who'd also been deemed not enough by people who should have seen everything. Michael understood best. "We're not products of broken families," he'd say. "We're proof that some people are strong enough to build better families than the ones they were born into." He was right. My chosen family, Marcus Reynolds, Dr. Chen, my creative team, the scholarship recipients who stayed in touch, Michael himself, they saw me clearly and loved what they saw. That was worth more than blood had ever been. The journey from disowned daughter to chief creative officer had taught me more about success than any business school could have. Real success wasn't about proving my family wrong about me. It was about proving myself right about my own worth. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate required energy I preferred to invest elsewhere in building the empire they'd said I'd never create. They were just people who'd confused DNA with love, status with worth, control with care. My work had evolved beyond personal vindication into genuine social impact. The Creative Orphans support group I'd started met monthly in Reynolds Global's conference room. 40 members now, all high achievers who'd been told they weren't enough by the people who should have been their biggest cheerleaders. Family isn't who you're born to, I told them at each meeting. It's who shows up when you're becoming who you're meant to be. The book agent had called again last week. Your story could inspire millions, Sarah. From disowned to director, building success without family approval. It would be a bestseller. Maybe someday. But first, I had a company to help lead, a foundation to expand, a wedding to plan, and a future to build with people who saw my worth clearly. I thought about my former family sometimes, usually triggered by small moments. Mother-daughter lunches at nearby tables, siblings supporting each other's achievements, parents beaming with pride at their children's successes. The ache was still there, but muted now, like an old injury that only hurt when pressure systems changed. They'd given me an unexpected gift that night at Maria, not the connections or opportunities they'd thought made them valuable, but something far more precious. Freedom. Freedom from seeking approval that would never come. Freedom from shrinking to fit their narrow definition of worth. Freedom to discover that I'd always been enough, just never for them. My assistant knocked. "Ms. Mitchell, the board meeting is starting in 5 minutes." I stood, smoothing my Armani suit and adjusting my grandmother's pearls, the ones I'd been told I hadn't earned but had claimed anyway. At 29, I'd earned everything I had through talent, determination, and the refusal to accept other people's limitations as my own truth. The business news was brutal in its coverage of my former family's continued decline. The Washington Post had run a feature called "The Mitchell Family Fall," a case study in parental misjudgment. The article detailed how their public disownment of a daughter who turned out to be extraordinarily successful had destroyed their careers, their marriage, and their social standing. My father's pension barely covered his studio apartment rent. My mother was working as a substitute teacher in Queens public schools. My brother had moved to Portland, unable to rebuild his career in a city where everyone knew he'd failed to defend his sister. The family mansion had sold for 60% of its original value due to the scandal. The buyer was a tech entrepreneur who'd specifically mentioned wanting to erase the negative energy from the property. Meanwhile, my penthouse had been featured in Architectural Digest as an example of when success meets sophisticated design. The photo spread included my home office, where the disownment letter was prominently displayed next to my collection of industry awards. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The family who thought they were protecting their reputation had destroyed it, while the daughter they deemed unworthy had built a reputation that opened every door in America. The quarterly shareholders' meeting was standing room only. I presented the creative division's results. 47 Fortune 500 clients, $12 billion in combined client value creation, and a 300% increase in government contracts since my arrival. Marcus Reynolds announced my promotion to Chief Creative Officer at the meeting's end. The applause lasted 40 seconds, a record for a shareholder presentation. Sarah Mitchell represents the future of strategic communications, he told the assembled investors. Her vision and execution have redefined what creative excellence means in corporate America. That evening, I hosted a celebration dinner at Maria, the same restaurant, the same private dining room where my parents had tried to destroy me 2 years earlier. This time, I was the host. The guest list was deliberately chosen. Marcus Reynolds, Chief Justice Williams, the Secretary of Commerce, and 12 Fortune 500 CEOs whose respect my parents would have sold their souls to earn. We raised a toast at table 7, the exact spot where I'd been handed disownment papers on my 29th birthday. To families that choose us, Marcus said, raising his glass. Not families that reject us. Through Maria's windows, I could see my reflection in the glass. Sarah Mitchell, Chief Creative Officer, successful beyond my former family's wildest imagination, surrounded by people who saw my worth clearly and celebrated it unconditionally. The Mitchell name that they'd tried to take from me had become a brand worth millions. The daughter they'd called worthless had become worth more than they'd ever dream of being. But the real victory wasn't the money, or the titles, or the recognition. The real victory was the peace I felt, knowing that I'd never again need anyone's permission to be exactly who I was meant to be. So here's what I need you to understand, especially if you're watching this and feeling invisible in your own family. Your worth isn't a popularity contest, especially with people who share your DNA. Your value doesn't require their validation to be real. I spent 29 years performing for an audience that had already decided I wasn't worth applauding. The moment I stopped performing for them and started building for myself, everything changed. Family isn't about blood loyalty that flows in only one direction. Real family supports your dreams, celebrates your victories, and stands by you when the world gets difficult. Blood relatives who can't do those things aren't family. They're just people you happen to be related to. The night my parents disowned me at Maria, they thought they were writing the final chapter of my story. Instead, they freed me to write my own book. And that book became a bestseller. Success is the best response to people who underestimate you. Not because you need to prove them wrong, but because you deserve to prove yourself right. The family that rejected me gave me the greatest gift they could have given: the permission to stop seeking their approval and start building my own legacy. If your family can't see your worth, keep building anyway. The right people will notice. The right opportunities will find you. The right family will choose you. And when they try to come back, and they will try when your success becomes undeniable, remember that reconciliation is a choice, not an obligation. Forgiveness doesn't require letting them back into the life they tried to destroy. Your worth isn't a family vote. It's a personal truth that you get to define. Own it. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that their value doesn't require family approval. Drop a comment about your own journey from family disappointment to personal triumph. Let's build a community of people who understand that sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the family you're born into. Remember, the people who can't see your worth today will be reading about your success in tomorrow's headlines. See you in the next story.